Gabby. I'm really happy to be here. I tell people this all the time, and I know it sounds nerdy, but like MTSS is my love language. And I've done a lot of things with students with intervention and campus leadership, and also helping students who are emergent bilingual. So we'll go ahead and get started. And even after today, whether or not you're in Texas, if you have any questions, concerning MTSS accommodations or anything in general, please feel free to contact me and I will be more than happy to answer your questions. So we'll go ahead and get started with an overview of MTSS accommodations. Some fast facts about accommodations. First of all, there is no list of approved classroom accommodations. Theoretically, you can provide anything to a child in the classroom that the committee feels necessary. You can start with a checklist of things that are typical, let's say for students who have reading struggles or who have behavior issues. But again, it's not a carte blanche menu where we're just choosing everything on there. We're still always looking at the student's specific difficulty and to meet the individual student's needs. Again, we're not going to say every student who's 1 year behind in reading will get this set of accommodations, but it's okay to have a list to draw inspiration from. Keep in mind that the terms at student request or as needed in most cases is insufficient. Most state and federal laws do have something that regards that. I know OCR talks about it with 504, and I do also know that OSERS talks about it with special education. So it's only logical that our MTSS plans also do not have that language. A lot of times I see at student requests written for oral administration. Well, if the student reads below grade level and we know Johnny can't read well, we should not wait for Johnny to ask for his academic accommodation, right? That makes sense to not use a student request there. However, when you think about a behavioral issue, it's okay to write in Susie can go to the reset spot when she is feeling, insert whatever feeling that the MTSS committee has chosen. Because again, students don't have behavioral reactions on a schedule, right? And it makes sense for Susie to ask to go to her reset spot. So make sure that your MTSS teams are thinking about those things when using words as needed in its student request. With that in mind, make sure that all accommodations are easy for teachers to implement. In about my 20 years of education, it's always been, not always, but 95% of the time when accommodations aren't implemented, it's because they're too difficult or too cumbersome. And sometimes the teachers that just aren't trained in how to do those. So make sure that whatever you write, it can be done, because once you put it in a plan, you have created a contract with the parents saying that this is what we're going to do. And in many states, there are legal implications of not following that plan as written. Keep in mind that classroom and state assessment accommodations may be very different. That doesn't mean that just because we can't have it on our state assessment, that we can't have it in the classroom. Oftentimes we give our students that are struggling at tier 3 with reading issues and spelling issues, we'll give them like spelling assistance in the classroom. However, on many state assessments, that's not applicable, right? And that's okay. We just need to make sure that we make it very clear to the parents, the students, and the teachers that they can have it in the classroom because they need it to get by on a day-to-day basis. However, state regulations stipulate that that's not acceptable for the state assessments. And just making it very clear has caused a lot more clarity and made the plans a lot easier for the parents to understand. And the slides, if you click here, I'm sorry, you can't see that part of my screen. If you scroll down underneath the viewing screen that says access PDF of slide deck here, and you'll be able to get it there. So when we think about accommodations, the federal government, U.S. Department of Ed has asked us to look at the 4 different categories of accommodations. First is presentation. This is how we view or access the information in a different way for the students. This is best for students who have difficulty visually reading standard print for whatever reason. Some examples could be large print using a magnification device, having a human person read aloud to them, or using text to speech. This could even be done with the Zoom feature on the iPad, because I know many campuses have moved to a one-to-one technology campus. And now we have a question in the chat. Do you use and document accommodations for Tier 2 students in your district? Yes, when I was at the campus level, we did do that. And now that I'm at a service center, I do advise all of the districts I work with to use documentation, simply because one part of accommodations is that we're supposed to determine if they're effective, and we can't determine if they're effective if we don't document those. And later in the presentation, I'm going to show you some examples of how you can document, and also show you a quick way to evaluate if the accommodations are good. Next, we have the response accommodations. This allows alternative ways for students to respond. This is best for those students who have difficulty with memory, sequencing, directionality, and organization. Some examples would be pre-typed or fill-in notes. For our younger students, sometimes pre-typed notes make sense. However, I think our older students or students who only have minor struggles, fill-in notes are better, just because sometimes when they get the notes given to them right away, it's less likely that they pay attention and are engaged in the classroom instruction. However, with the fill-in notes, they still have to pay attention, and they're filling in words and phrases here or there. But again, that choice will be determined based upon the individual student's needs. You could have a recording app or a device for our students who may have ADHD, but have not gone through the 504 or SPED evaluation process, and they're still at tier 3 for their behavior. Having them to record the instruction and listen to it later, that is also helpful for them. We've got spelling assistants, graphic organizers. Those are helpful to any students, whether it's for academic or focusing needs, and also speech to text for our students who struggle typically with written expression and sometimes handwriting to get their words from their brain to the paper. So we have a question in the chat. What you described seem to be a 504 accommodations, however you call them MTSS. Can you clarify? These accommodations are good for any child, okay? And it really depends upon the level of the need. There's no specific accommodations, whether it's MTSS, 504, or SPED. They do overlap. Because like pre-typed or fill-in notes, any student who struggles with handwriting can be held at tier 3 because they don't have a full, they don't have a disability, but they do struggle. So that way you can have those accommodations there. So timing, adjusting the schedule or length of the assignments. This is best for students who need more time because they may have a reading difficulty or issues with math calculation, and they just need a little bit more time than others. Students who fatigue easily just because they're struggling in some area, and some students who do have medication needs, but again, they're not covered under 504 or SPED. and they have to leave the classroom for certain things. You may give them extended time. They may have frequent breaks or multiple testing sessions. When we think about multiple testing sessions, we're thinking about, like, if I'm giving a test on Monday from 9 to 10 o'clock, I will give that student the test on Monday from 9 to 9:30, and then give them the other half on Tuesday from 9 to 9:30. We just have to make sure that when we're choosing things like extended time and multiple testing sessions, that we work with the teachers on good ways to implement that in their classrooms, because that shouldn't take away from the students' recess or their specials times, or their free time, or even after school when we can help it. And then we have setting. We're providing an alternate, non-traditional place to complete assignments. This is best for students who get easily distracted in large group settings or concentrate best in small groups. Sometimes you have to think about the other students in our classes, because sometimes our students with behavioral needs will be distracting to others. So sometimes that may be a factor in choosing the setting accommodations. It could be the change of the room, where they're going into a separate room altogether. It could be a different location in the room, to where I've had some students in the past to where, okay, for the regular classroom, they're in their regular seat, but for testing, they sat over there away from distractions. You could have earbuds or headphones, and the studies carrels or the offices to remove distractions. Just keep in mind with the study carrels, the teacher needs to have a full line of sight at all times, because we need to know what the students are doing behind those, especially for our older ones. So let's see. Uh-oh. Was weirdly placed. Sorry. So let's talk about accommodations and eligibility. Students are eligible for MTSS accommodations if all of the following conditions are met. One, the student is currently receiving MTSS services. So they're either at Tier 2 or Tier 3, based upon your campus committee's decisions. The accommodations are chosen based upon the student's specific needs. Keep in mind that if the student is only there for behavior or social emotional needs, the accommodations we choose need to reflect that. If it's for academic needs, the accommodations we choose need to reflect that. Sometimes you might have a student who is Tier 2 for behavior and Tier 3 for academics, and that is okay. One MTSS plan can encompass all of that and meet all of those students' needs. There should be sufficient data to warrant the accommodations. I always tell everyone we base our choices on educational needs for our students based upon facts and not feelings. And we've got to show some data to prove that Johnny needs a certain accommodation. All accommodations are approved by the MTSS team, and they must be written into the intervention plan. Okay. Yes, supporting the student as a whole child. Yes, and that's honestly what MTSS is all about. What I've noticed is many campuses have a plan for behavior, have a plan for academics, have a plan for mental health, but they're always more effective when they put them all under the MTSS umbrella. That way, all of the people are in the room to really get down to the root of the issues. Okay, so here are some common MTSS accommodations. I created this based on what I see the most of. And again, yes, there is a lot of overlap with what's allowed for 504 and special education, and even also for our ESL and EB students, simply because they're just good accommodations. And the only thing that changes what's available to them is their level of need. The only thing that changes on state assessment is Sometimes, depending upon your state, they have their own rules about what's allowable on state assessments. But keep in mind, again, you can provide whatever they're needed on the daily, on a daily basis, and that is up to the MTSS committee. Yes, these are accommodations, not interventions. So let's look at, because accommodations change how the student accesses the learning. Okay, so that might be oral administration or allowing math manipulatives, or having different note taking tools. When we think about an intervention, that is what we do with the child. That's what we provide to the child as far as a service. That's those 3 times a week for 30 minutes. I'm working on reading comprehension skills. That's my check-in, check-out with the counselor on my mental status of that day. So accommodations and services are very different. Okay. And I left it as a spreadsheet, so that way you can download it and update it based upon what's required in your district, and also it can be adapted to meet your state assessment needs as well. And if you're in Texas, I also have a full-on example of this, of what's allowed through each committee for state assessment, and also a connection to post-secondary assessment. So if you're from Texas and you want that full document, just email me and I will send that to you. So when we look at accommodations, we have to make sure that they are specific, clear, and complete when we write those in our plans. They need to be written so explicitly that anyone with an educational background can pick that plan up and implement it. So if it says Johnny has preferential seating near the teacher, they know exactly what that means. And we know that when Johnny comes in class, he sits right here. So let's look at some examples and non-examples of writing our accommodations. This comes up a lot: small group testing. A poor example of that would be student will take tests and quizzes in the learning lab at student request. There's a couple of issues with that. The at student request, well, if Jimmy needs small group assessment, we need to make sure that happens. We should not wait for Jimmy to ask for it. Also, we didn't say what tests, right? We don't know if it's just reading or math or whatever. So here's a better way to write that. The student will take tests and quizzes in the learning lab for math and science. All materials will be delivered to the lab prior to the class period. So that lets us know a couple of things. One, as a teacher, I cannot do a pop quiz, okay, because I have to make sure this information is in the testing lab beforehand. Also, if the student has multiple teachers, we only need to address this during math and science, because that was based upon Johnny's MTSS plan, and that's exactly what he needed. Apparently, there's a behavioral issue here to where Johnny can't get the things from the classroom to the learning lab, so I need to make sure that happens, whether I, as the teacher, give a physical copy or I email a document to the learning lab educator and they print it off. Next, graphic organizers. We see this a lot. Student uses graphic organizers in reading language arts. The big issue with that is there's hundreds and thousands of graphic organizers. Well, which one, right? Which ones do we use? Because every one of them may not be good for little Susie. So we'll write, student uses the following blank graphic organizers in math. That should have said reading. I need to fix that. I made a mistake. Sorry. Venn diagram, main idea and details, and essay pre-writing. So those are the exact accommodations that we're going to use. Those are the 3 graphic organizers. I'm sorry, three, I can't count today, 3 graphic organizers that we're going to use in reading language arts for Susie. So we have a question in the chat. How are the accommodations communicated to all staff working with students? What's the accountability piece? You would share this information the same way you would share it for your 504 students or your SPED students. Whatever process you have for that, this should mimic that. One thing we did was, as soon as we printed it off after our MTSS meetings, we would just send it out to every teacher. You can also have it, if you don't have a specific software that does that, you can even just save it in Google Drives and just lock it to where only certain people have access to it. So that way you meet FERPA and privacy laws as well. So extra time, student will receive extra time to complete assigned work. Again, that's very vague, and theoretically, if I give an assignment that's 40 minutes and I give little Johnny 45, I've met my mark of giving extra time. Well, we all know 5 extra minutes typically isn't enough for a student who is struggling and is at tier 2 or tier 3. So a better example would be student will receive 50% extra time to complete assigned work for ELA and science. So again, I know exactly what subjects this is for, and I know exactly how much time we have. Again, with the issue with extra time, it may not always be feasible. So make sure that when you're creating these plans that you have some way of making sure this happens. Sometimes it's just working with your teachers of saying, okay, if you know you're giving a test on Monday, and you know you've got 2 or 3 students with 50% extra time in your lesson plans, you need to write in some time for that to happen on Tuesday or Wednesday. Maybe that's occurring while the other students are doing independent work or doing a station activity, or the other students are doing something for review. But that extra time does need to happen in the class period. My own child, my personal children's school, they have kind of like a intervention hour at one of the campuses that one of my kids is at, and the other campus, they just have a study hall. So a lot of times the extra time that will happen, because my son, he needs extra time for some of his assignments, and that's on his plan. They do that during that study hall. So that way it's not taking from anything else. Okay. So we have a question in the chat. Let me get back over. First one. So I'm here from Canada. What is a 504? Is it like an individual education plan? Yes. It's in America. We have a step before we get to special education. And you can kind of view it as SPED light, to where the student doesn't have a profound disability, but they do have something that is getting in the way of their educational access. It may not always be to the level to where an academic need is there, but they may have problems with just accessing materials, to where school could be difficult for them. So that's kind of a step in between. The next question, so is this used as a precursor to a 504 plan? We have a solid MTSS program in place at our school, but don't put formal MTSS accommodations in place when a student is identified as needing tier 2 or tier 3 support for academics. Yes, it is precursor to a 504 plan, because that's what MTSS is. We're catching the students before they get so far behind to where they need 504 or they need special education. MTSS is all about being proactive. Some students may not need accommodations. So you may not have an accommodations plan for that student, but they just need the services where they just receive those extra classes, maybe 2 times a week for 30 minutes to work on a specific skill. But yes, this is what should happen before that. Yes, my screen should be shared. Okay. And sometimes, all right, we're good. And sometimes when we think about extra time, reduced assignments may be even more appropriate. You maybe have reduced assignments for the daily work, but you give the extra time for the assessment, because again, that's a lot for a teacher to keep up with if every day they're trying to give a child extra time for everything. Sometimes if it's not that dire, I'll just have in the plans we'll write 50% extra time on graded assignments. Because again, we don't need to give extra time for an exit ticket. Okay. We shouldn't expect teachers to give extra time for stations. But the things that go in the grade book, we need to make sure that occurs. So the goal of accommodations, the value of any accommodation is measured in terms of its impact on student performance. Again, we're looking at the impact could be growth in academics where they're making better grades. It could be that they're just using proper replacement behaviors that we've taught them. It could be that if we're working on self-worth at tier 2 or tier 3 for SEL, that the student does display more positive talk on their behalf. So the goal is different depending on whether it's academic, behavior, or SEL. Okay. The long-term goal of any of the accommodations we provide for our students is that the need for them will fade over time. Like I said, MTSS is proactive, whether it's the services or the accommodations that the students receive. The goal is for them to eventually be self-reliant on their own abilities, to where we're now no longer reminding Johnny to take the 3 deep breaths, to count backwards from 10 when he gets overwhelmed. Johnny is doing that on his own. Okay, so we no longer have to accommodate for that because he's doing that naturally. So we have a question in the chat. Could you discuss modifications as it differs from accommodations and interventions? That is a great question. Again, accommodations change how we learn, how we access learning, as far as maybe I'm typing my answers versus writing them out. Modifications is when we change the actual curriculum. It's where the overall expectations, which is only in America, you can only have modifications to curriculum if you are in special education. So if I'm a 4th grader and it says I'm writing full-on essays in 4th grade is one of my TEKs, I can, under SPED, okay, I can be provided with a modification to say maybe I'm writing a half a page instead of that full page. Under MTSS, our accommodation might be, we're still writing that full page. I may have extra time to write that full page. I may be able to type that full page instead of handwriting it. I may be provided with a specific graphic organizer to help me organize my learning. So that's the difference there. Yes, we want them to gain independence and not depend on our long-term intervention support. Yeah, that's what it's all about. Honestly, I remember when I first became the RTI and MTSS coordinator at my campus before here, we had too many kids because that was a K-4 campus, and we had so many kids at tier 2 and tier 3 and 3rd and 4th grade. But eventually it changed to where it was more students at K2 at tier 2 and 3, because if you catch it early, you have fewer students who need intervention later. Because ideally the goal is to, once you catch it early, by 3rd and 4th grade, at least on my campus, they were either out of tiers altogether, they no longer needed interventions, or they were appropriately placed in the 504 or special education program because they truly had some disability that was more than what MTSS could carry. So we have our first activity here. Take a moment to answer at least one of the questions on the Padlet. So you can use your QR code here or type in the tiny URL and it will take you to a Padlet and just answer one of the questions there. You guys have been super interactive and I really appreciate it. Yes, because I do standalone sessions just for RTI, just for the academic path with people here. So yes, RTI and MTSS are synonymous here. Because since I'm in Texas, we've had to work on that verbiage and make that transition. They've been doing MTSS, they just didn't realize they were. Okay, I'll give a few more seconds, then we'll look at the results. So for the first question, what percentage of your teachers fully understand, insert MTSS? About a third. We've got 30 to 40%. Let me make this a little smaller so we can see more. Okay, 30 to 40, probably 10. Oh, wow, we see some 50% there. That's really good. I think it is responsibility of a team or other individuals. Yeah, that is hard to get past. But the more we stress MTSS, the more we people understand that no, it's an all-in approach. We're no longer in those silos. It's a team effort. And I've been there. 75%. Good job. Okay. So what is something you wish more teachers understood about MTSS accommodations? That accommodations are for any student who would benefit from them, not just students with IEPs or 504s. Yeah, that's a hard thing to get over for some of our teachers because even now, I talk to district administrators a lot, and I even hear district administrators asking, well, why would we give him an extra, right? Why would we give them a crutch? I'm like, no, we're not giving them anything, right? We're supporting a specific need that they have. Like my son, he does need extra support in things. My daughter, she is fine. So giving her extra time, that does nothing for her, whereas another student may benefit. And we all just need to be cognizant of that. It's everyone's responsibility. It starts in the classroom. You are correct. The best deterrent to Tier 2, the need for Tier 2 and Tier 3 is proper Tier 1 instruction. And trying to stress to our teachers that we need to give them quality instruction the first time and sometimes the second time before we even look at referring a student for Tier 2 or Tier 3. It is not solely a pathway to SPED. You are correct. It starts in the gen ed classroom. The process is preventative maintenance. That's so, so important. It's everyone's responsibility. Okay. So what is one way that you prepare teachers for choosing, documenting, and evaluating accommodations, working as a team? We're not there yet. And you know what? That's okay. MTSS is a process, and you start where you start. Every campus and every district has very different needs. And that's honestly the beauty of MTSS. You pick where you are and you grow from there. It takes honestly 3 to 5 years to get a good, solid model going, working effectively and efficiently. Involving them in every step of the process along the way, making decisions together. And branching minds. Yes, it's a great wealth of information. Several of the districts I work with use branching minds. And then this one comment, offer to help them out. That is very important. As leaders, we have to support them. If we say we want you to do a certain accommodation, by golly, we need to make sure that we show them what that accommodation truly looks like in the classroom. We should show them the expectations of that, should have follow-up conversations about it. A lot of times when I would do walkthroughs and I noticed that certain accommodations weren't done well, I didn't really point anyone out because it was common amongst the campus. Hey, in our PLCs, I had a 5-minute mini PD about, okay, here's an example of accommodation. Let's talk about it. What things are you seeing? I might video a teacher who's doing it well, whether it's at my campus or another campus within the district, so they could see a proper model for it. So I have a couple of more questions in the chat. Do you have a table defining written interventions, like the table you shared in your slides for written accommodations? Sorry, Rachel, I don't. I just have the examples that I provided. And I appreciate that, Christina, with the accommodations. Again, I try to always provide things that I wish I had had in the classroom, because a lot of times that's what we need as teachers and also as leaders. It's always good to have a reference point. Thank you for your participation. Now let's look at documentation. So why do we do this? We do it for a couple of reasons. It ensures fidelity of the MTSS plan. Because again, if we don't document it, we don't know if it's working. We don't even know if it's getting done, right? You can't do something that you don't know about. And also, a student's needs should change over time under MTSS. Eventually, they're going to work their way out of the interventions and the accommodations, and we need to have a way to put that on paper. Also, it protects us from any litigation with parents that may occur. Again, documentation over confrontation. So how do we do this? The best way to do accommodations is to have checklists. This can be digital or paper. I prefer digital, and I'm going to show you an example of what I used at the campus level with MTSS and also for my ESL students to keep track of their accommodations. But make sure you do what works best for your campus, whether you purchase a system that does that for you, where you just type it in and it's all in one place, or if your district isn't able to purchase something of that magnitude, you can create something in a Google Doc or a spreadsheet or have printable pages that do the same thing. But whatever you do, it's best to follow your 504 SPED and ESL processes because it makes it easier for everyone involved. It's easier for the parents to understand because, again, they're not trying to learn how to read 3 or 4 different sets of papers. It all looks the same. It's also easier for the teachers to do and keep track of. And it's also easier for when we hand off from students from MTSS to 504 or SPED. It's just easier for them to understand and process. And the more you're in a streamlined situation, the better for everyone. So how do we do this effectively? First, we talked about creating your system. Again, you do what's best for your campus. Designate responsibilities. You need to make sure that the teachers know, first off and foremost, that they are responsible for documenting the accommodations that apply to their classroom. So if it says for math, Mr. Jones, you teach math, so you have to document these accommodations. Ms. Smith, you teach reading, so you have to document these. Sometimes our specialist teachers like art and music, they may or may not have accommodations that they have to document. Again, that just goes back to the specific student's needs. You also need to decide on the campus who's going to follow up, who's going to make sure this happens. That was my job for both ESL and reading. And I just checked in once every 6 weeks. I would send out an email reminding teachers to, hey, please update your accommodations. I'm going to pull those and print those off on this date. Please have those in by such and such date. This was also helpful because the teachers also knew that, hey, we can't say this accommodation didn't work if you didn't do it. Okay, so don't say you want to take something off without proving that the student doesn't need it. Also, don't say you want to add something if you also haven't done documentation to show that it was helpful. So that helps in a lot of ways. Train your team on exactly how the process works and your expectations. Be sure to share information early and often. Sometimes teachers forget. Sometimes they just need a reminder to say, hey, be sure you're documenting. And it's not a whole thing. It doesn't have to be a huge conversation. And what happens when you have those one or two who just don't document? Most of the time, it's not because they don't want to. It's maybe they don't understand something, or they could just be going through a moment in their life where they need extra support. And, maybe that's me who comes in to help with the documentation. Maybe we have one of the people in the intervention team or a paraprofessional to help support them through that tough time. So again, we just have to spot treat in those situations. So here's an example of an accommodation tracker that I've created. There's no law that states how often you need to accommodate. However, the law does state that you have to give the accommodation every time it's applicable. Okay, so even though you're doing it on a daily basis, you don't need to write on every piece of paper that the kid did or every day. Weekly has shown to hold up in court when there has been litigation around students not getting what was promised. And I use this is the Google Docs version of what I use. And I liked it because I didn't have to have one for math and one for reading. It could all be on the same page. And it was just less paperwork for me. So I only had to check one spot to make sure all of Jimmy's accommodations were put in. And here I could have a conversation with the math teacher because in red, the student refused. Okay, for 2 weeks, this student has refused the accommodation. So hopefully the teacher would have written something down in the comments here to explain. But if not, I see the red M. So that prompts me as the campus leader to go say, hey, what's going on? Is there a reason why Jimmy's refusing? Was he having another social emotional need that wasn't being met that day? Or has this accommodation, has he outgrown this accommodation? Do we need to change something? And sometimes, like here, for the blue W in writing, the supplemental aid was not needed that week due to the fact that they were doing other things to where they were not doing a writing composition. And it's okay to note that it's not needed. Any data is good data. So now that we've done all the documenting, now we're going to look at how we can evaluate whether or not it was effective. So I'm going to move forward just because I don't want to run out of time, because I also want to save some time at the end for questions. But I will show you this activity. This is something you might even want to do with your campuses when you're talking about evaluating accommodations. This takes you through that whole process of looking at the different ways we can evaluate. Depending on the accommodation, it might be the speed or the rate at which the student completes something, or it could be the frequency if we're looking at behavior. And then it kind of goes through all those steps I just discussed and lead you to the end. So that's a good activity for you to take back and work with your leadership team to talk about, hey, how are we going to move forward? So I have a question in the chat. Do teachers need to turn in any physical student work? That depends on your expectations for your MTSS committees. I didn't ask for any physical student work unless they wanted to change an accommodation. Because if they said Jimmy no longer needed extra time, I want to see what was happening on that paper. Okay. If they're saying, oh, Sarah no longer needs her graphic organizer, show me the quality of work that happened without the graphic organizer. Same thing if they wanted to add an accommodation. Okay, you're saying they need to use the box method for math. Show me the quality of work that happens with the box method. I want to see them working out the boxes. I want to see the end product on the assessment. So really that depends, but I always used it for change, for making a change. So let's look at little Miss Jessica. She is a 4th grade student in science, and her area of concern is reading fluency and comprehension, which we know by 4th grade, science is a lot of reading. So if you can't read the material, you're going to struggle. Her difficulties include reading and understanding grade level text. That's why she's in the MTSS interventions. The effects of her issues, she often does not complete her reading assignments within the allotted time. And so her accommodation is 50% extra time to complete assignments. Okay, so how do we evaluate this? First, we look at her accommodation, and we see that her accommodation is reading comprehension, and we're going to look at it with and without giving her the extra time to see how she fares. Okay. First, the baseline data we're going to take is without the accommodation. So again, I recommend doing this over a 2-week period. The teacher should not create any new assignments just for Jessica. We're just taking observational data on what is already going on in the classroom. This should also not be for something that is for a grade, because her MTSS plan states that she should have extra time. Okay. So you got to give the extra time on a graded assignment, but like say if we're doing an exit ticket or a quick review or something of that nature, we're just going to pull that data here. And so here we see that she scored 50%, 40%, 57%, and 50% without the accommodation over a 2-week period. Okay. Then we do the same thing for approximately 2 weeks, where we're making sure that we're notating all of the times that she had her 50% extra time that is back on the table for her. And we're looking at those assignments. Again, since she's got her accommodation, as stated in her MTSS plan, this could be a graded assignment that we're pulling. Again, we're not creating extra assignments for Jessica. It's what's already in the teacher's lesson plans. And when we make sure that we explain that to the teachers, they're more apt to follow through because they're not creating something new. So she scored a 75, 83, 80, and 80. Okay. So then we have to compare it. So her baseline average without the accommodation was 49% proficiency, and then implementation average was 80%. So there was a 31% increase in Jessica's score. So based upon this accommodation is successful for her, and we will keep her extra time. Again, the data is telling us this. It isn't the teacher's choice. This isn't the parent's choice. It's not the committee's choice. The data speaks for itself, and the committee just is responsible for writing that into her plan. Now, if she only increased 5%, okay, that's not a statistical significance. In order for it to be statistically significant, it has to be at least one standard deviation, which is approximately 15%. However, for me, I typically look at 10% because, again, 15% is a huge tall order. So anywhere from 10 to 15% up or down, that will let you know if that accommodation is successful or not. So here is a link to some editable forms that you can use for determining if the accommodation has been successful. And when you click on them, I'll just click on this one randomly. Okay, not that one. That's not the one I want to explain. Those are summative. So if I want to look at accuracy, it gives you an example of what it could look like. And at the top, it tells you what accuracy means and an example of how it can be evaluated and what it would be best to evaluate for. There are a couple of other documents that help you to gather that information if you're looking at several accommodations. So I've got all the accommodations here, pre-test, post-test. Again, it's editable. You're able to change it. And then I'm determining yes or no. Okay, so I have a question in the chat. Who keeps track of the data, the teacher or an interventionist? The teacher, whoever's serving the child. So if the teacher is providing the accommodation at that time, then that teacher keeps track of it. If the interventionist is also doing the accommodation, then that person would keep track of it as well. So it's anyone who's providing that accommodation to the student. As far as the evaluation goes, it depends. If the interventionist is the one that says, hey, I want to reevaluate this, then it's the interventionist's job to track that data. If the teacher has determined that, hey, you know what, I want to evaluate this to see if it's still necessary for her, then it would be the teacher's job to track the evaluation. That's a great question. And there's also a document here. It helps make with the decisions. So again, we're not using feelings, we're using facts. And even if you don't have the time or your teachers just aren't ready to do the full-on checklist over the 2 weeks, the pre and post, this is qualitative data that they can use for you guys to make decisions. You just put in the accommodation, the subjects, and answer these questions, and that can help the committee determine where to go. And again, I've touched on this a little bit. We need to make sure that we provide training to the MTSS team about what accommodations are available to you. Again, different districts and campuses have their own set of rules, and those should definitely be followed. And different states have their own rules as regards to state assessment. So please follow those as well. Training to students. This may happen as needed, especially, for example, if we have a student using text to speech or speech to text on an iPad, we have to teach them, okay? We have to go ahead and write it in the plan. Maybe it's not an ongoing lesson. Maybe it's a one-time thing, and you just write the child will receive 1 hour of training by March 1st, something of that nature. And here we know who's going to give that training to them, so that way we make sure that the student knows how to use the accommodation. In that case, when we train students properly, they're less likely to refuse the accommodation as well. Also with the reset spot, this is one time where the teacher and the counselor have to work together here. We have to set parameters around the reset spot. We just can't say, you've got a spot over here. What does that look like? What does that plan look like? When is the child able to use that spot? Okay, and provide training to parents. Again, this is definitely as needed. Not every child needs to have their parents trained in their accommodations, but if you expect them to use it at home, then you should definitely train them. One thing I always did when we had our parent nights, I just had in a room, and it was special pops because I helped with RTI, I helped with ESL, 504, whatever. and it was just the room. And we would highlight 2 or 3 accommodations. And any parent was able to come and go to learn about what those accommodations look like at school and maybe on state assessment. And that way they could have a better understanding of what it looks like. And if they wanted ideas on how to help their children at home, they could receive them. That was great because I didn't single anyone out. It was a come and go situation. And I had students that met all sub-pops come in and out of the room. We have a question in the chat. MTSS does not roll over from year to year, correct? Process starts over if they have not been placed in SPED. Well, actually, MTSS should roll over from year to year. If they end the year at tier 2, they start the year at tier 2. Unless you have data that proves otherwise and you go officially through an MTSS meeting to take that student off. Because again, the data changes it, not just because a student moved to a different grade level. Okay. Yes, exactly, Patty. We have the same thought process. Any other questions?
All right, Crystal, if you don't mind me jumping in real quick, we do have a question in the Q&A. This comes from Catherine, and the question says, what would MTSS look like in middle school with block scheduling?
As far as interventions, I'm assuming. So that's a challenge in and of itself. That starts, for one, with creating the schedule. Proper MTSS interventions will not happen in secondary unless time is written into the schedule for it. If you don't have it set up to where there's a special time, things that you can do is teach the teachers that say, okay, these are your tier 2 students, these are your tier 3 students. On Tuesdays for 20 minutes, pull tier 2 and tier 3. Okay, start off with 1 day a week. Okay, for 20 minutes on their specific skills. And then you grow it from there and say, okay, we've done this for 6 weeks. Now I want you on Wednesday to pull the tier 3 students a second time. So that way your tier 2 is getting 1 time of 20 minutes to where they're getting that intervention. And now we have on Tuesday and Wednesday for our tier 3 students. So you have to be intentional and start where you can and then grow from there. We put documentation of accommodations and interventions in the permanent folder so that even if the child moves, the new teacher knows. That is very, very important. And even all the documentation I talked about today that you would collect, we always uploaded that in our system along with a physical version that goes in their permanent folders.
All right, that was great. I love all of the conversations and the interactions in the chat from everybody who attended. So thank you all so much. Crystal, thank you to you. This, I mean, for me, being a former educator, this was super enlightening, very valuable, just knowing that we can create that supportive framework for the students. And I really hope that everyone here took away that same little nugget and you feel a little bit more equipped to support your learners and enhance their success. I loved it. I believe we are at time right now. Hopefully everybody got Crystal's email. It's on the slides as well if you want to reach out to her. Right now, there's going to be an optional 15-minute networking session. Then after that, you have a 30-minute break because the sessions will resume at the 45-minute mark. But yeah, this was great. Any last words before you head out, Crystal?
No, just thank you guys for showing up, and I really appreciate all the kind comments.
I love it. Have a wonderful rest of your summit day, everybody.